When we think about massive companies, are they good for us or bad for us? It's a huge question. Are these giants engines of innovation, or are they more of a menace to consumers and suppliers? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the main dilemma at the heart of market power. Then we'll look at two really different case studies to see how this plays out in the real world. From there, we'll weigh the pros and cons for everyone involved and finish up by asking that big question: where's the right balance? So let's get right to it. At the heart of this whole topic is a central dilemma, one that economists, regulators, and, all of us as consumers really have to grapple with. It's a question that seems pretty simple on the surface, right? Are giant companies good or bad for us? But as soon as you dig into the economics, you find it's not that simple at all. There's a fundamental trade-off, and the answer is almost never a clear-cut yes or no. And this really gets to the core of the issue. You've got these two competing ideas. On the one hand, a huge firm with little competition might just jack up prices and limit our choices. Not great. But on the other hand, that same company's massive scale can create incredible efficiencies, which could actually lead to lower prices for us. Plus, those big profits they're making, well, they could be plowed right back into research and development, driving innovation. So you see the tension here, right? Let's dig into some real-world examples to see how this actually works. Okay, on to our first case study, the innovator. We're going to look at how patents are used to create what are basically temporary monopolies. And for this, we're diving into the pharmaceutical industry where governments actually do this on purpose. So what exactly is a legal monopoly? It's when competition is restricted because a government grants something like a patent. It's an intentional barrier to entry, and a perfect textbook example of this is the story of Pfizer's blockbuster cholesterol drug, Lipitor. Now, while that patent was active, Pfizer was the only game in town. They could set the price for Lipitor without worrying about competitors, which meant they could charge around $180 for a month's supply. And yeah, that allowed them to earn some really significant profits. But those profits were also what paid back the massive investment they made in research and development to create the drug in the first place. But here's the really crucial part. This legal monopoly had an expiration date. It was always meant to be temporary. And that date, November 30, 2011, was a game changer. The moment that patent expired, the whole market structure was transformed, and the door was thrown wide open for competition. And what happened next is just a fantastic illustration of what competition does. As soon as generic versions of the drug, now called atorvastatin, hit the market, the price just cratered. It dropped by more than 95%. For consumers, the benefit was huge, and it was immediate. Now, if we put our economics hats on for a second, what we're seeing here is a huge increase in what's called consumer surplus. It's basically a transfer of wealth. All that money that was going to Pfizer in the form of profits is now staying right in the pockets of the people buying the medicine. That's a very clear, tangible gain for them. Okay, and this is a really important but, we have to look at the other side. This is the essential counterargument. Those high prices and high profits we saw earlier, that's the incentive. That's what drives companies to innovate in the first place. Think about it. Without the promise of that temporary monopoly, would these companies really be willing to invest billions into the risky long-term R&D that gives us these life-saving drugs? Probably not. All right, let's shift gears now. For our second case study, the Dominator, we're looking at a totally different kind of market power. This isn't one that's granted by a patent. Nope, this one is built through sheer size, scale, and efficiency. And for this, we're heading to the grocery aisle. At its peak, the UK retailer Tesco was an absolute behemoth. Get this, 1 out of every £8 spent by anyone on anything in the entire country was spent inside a Tesco. With a market share of almost 32%, you can imagine the immense power that gave them. So how did they get so big? Well, Tesco became masters of leveraging what we call internal economies of scale. We're talking about purchasing in just unbelievable bulk, investing in the best logistics and technology, and hiring specialists for every little thing. All of this worked together to systematically push their average costs way, way down, far below what any smaller competitor could even dream of. And a huge piece of this puzzle was its incredible buying power. Because it was the single biggest customer for thousands of its suppliers, it gained a special kind of power called monopsony power. See, in a normal market, a buyer just takes the price the seller offers. But Tesco, they were so big, they could pretty much set the price they were willing to pay.
They became a price maker. And this is where we see the dark side of that power. Yeah, Tesco's efficiency was great for shoppers. It meant lower prices on the shelves, but that often came at a huge cost to their suppliers. There were widespread complaints from dairy farmers, for instance, who said they were being squeezed so hard that the price they got for their milk was actually less than what it cost them to produce it. Okay, so we've looked at the innovator and the dominator. Let's put these two stories side by side now so we can really weigh the consequences and see who wins and who loses. This table really lays it all out, doesn't it? If you look at the consumer, they seem to do pretty well in both cases, eventually with Pfizer and right away with Tesco. But those benefits don't come for free. The costs? Well, for consumers, it was those high drug prices during the patent period, and for the community, the loss of local shops. And for suppliers, in Tesco's case, it meant getting squeezed on prices. And notice how the source of their power is completely different. For Pfizer, it's a patent, a deliberate government policy. For Tesco, it's economies of scale, a result of market competition. And all of this brings us full circle, right back to that fundamental question of balance. This is the core challenge that economists and policymakers are always trying to figure out. Because the main takeaway here is that there just isn't a simple one-size-fits-all answer. You can't just label large firms as good or bad. It's way too simplistic. What really matters is the context. You have to ask, what industry are we talking about? Where did this market power come from? And what are the trade-offs? That's where the real analysis lies. So that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. Think about the giant companies that are part of your daily life, the tech platforms you use, the stores you shop at. It's worth asking yourself, where does the balance of power lie with them? Who's really benefiting? Who's paying the price? And most importantly, do we think that balance is right?